Carl Jung never used the term female manipulation, but he gave us the tools to understand it, psychologically, symbolically, and unapologetically. In his work on the anima, the unconscious feminine within every man, Jung explained how a man who doesn't confront his inner fantasies is wide open to being controlled by them in the real world. Not because women are inherently manipulative, but because the man has left parts of himself unseen and unclaimed. You think she's your soulmate, your savior, your missing piece. That's not love. That's projection. Jung said, projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face. You're not seeing her. You're seeing what you want to see, what you need to see. And when the illusion shatters, you're left broken, confused, and often bitter. Not because she lied, but because you did, first to yourself. If you're tired of being confused, drained, or manipulated by relationships that feel like they started out perfect but ended in chaos, subscribe. What you're about to hear is not pickup advice. It's psychological survival. It's the path back to self-possession. Because until you reclaim the parts of you that crave approval, worship, and emotional rescue, you'll always be vulnerable to being reshaped by someone else's expectations. Jung warned that the anima can seduce a man into fantasy, weakness, and emotional dependence. She becomes the internal voice that tells him he's only complete if he's chosen, validated, adored. This inner voice is powerful because it sounds like love, like purpose, like destiny. But it's not. It's a trap built from your own unconscious needs. And once that belief takes root, a woman doesn't even have to manipulate him consciously. He's already surrendered his power. He begins to orbit her emotions, her moods, her approval, forgetting his own center entirely. He becomes passive, indecisive, self-erasing. He tells himself he's being loving. But love without boundaries is not love. It's self-abandonment. And the anima, when not integrated, feeds off that abandonment. She isn't your enemy, but she becomes dangerous when you refuse to face her. She represents your longing, your vulnerability, your creativity. But when those qualities remain unconscious, they're projected, not integrated. And projection makes you blind. This isn't about blaming women. It's about waking up as a man. Because when you don't own your inner life, someone else will. And whether they mean to or not, they will use it to bend you into something you never wanted to be. If you want to be free, you don't need control. You need clarity. And clarity starts with facing the anima, not as a goddess to worship, but as a mirror you must read. Only then can you build relationships from strength, not from shadow. Only then can you love without losing yourself. The anima is not evil, but she is seductive. And for the man who has never faced himself fully, she becomes irresistible. She appears in the form of the ideal woman, mysterious, nurturing, magnetic. But what she's really doing is showing you the parts of yourself you haven't claimed. When you confuse projection for connection, you hand over your strength in exchange for fantasy. Jung said that the danger of the anima isn't just in relationships, it's in your inner life. She can make you emotionally reactive, creatively paralyzed, and spiritually dependent. You don't think for yourself. You wait to be emotionally rescued. You don't lead. You follow desire. You don't listen to your logic. You chase chemistry. This is where manipulation takes root. Not because she is calculating, but because you are unconscious. If a man doesn't know who he is, he becomes whatever the situation demands. If he's not rooted, he floats. If he doesn't stand for something, he's pulled into everything. And this isn't just weakness, it's danger, because it makes you vulnerable to anyone who knows how to press your buttons. Jung wasn't warning you about women. He was warning you about your own unexamined soul, about the price you pay for ignoring your depth. He believed here's where it gets even more dangerous. Most men don't even realize they're being manipulated because they mistake intensity for intimacy. They confuse chaos for passion. They think being needed is the same as being respected. Jung would call this a failure of individuation. The man has not become a whole person. He is still a fragment, looking for another fragment to feel complete. And the anima knows how to play this game, whether consciously or not. She appears as the muse, the ideal, the woman who finally makes you feel alive. But it's not her you're addicted to. It's the feeling she activates in you, the feeling of purpose, of mission, of being wanted. But if she pulls away, or withholds affection, or makes you prove yourself, you collapse. Because your self-worth wasn't grounded in you. It was outsourced. Jung warned about this dependency. He said, the possession of the anima means a state of bondage to the woman. And that bondage doesn't require chains. It only requires emotional need. The moment you place your identity in someone else's hands, you hand over the steering wheel of your life. And they don't even have to drive to wreck it. They just have to sit there while you crash yourself trying to keep them comfortable. This is the real danger. Not overt control, but subtle emotional domination. You shape yourself to avoid her silence. You change your values to keep her attention. You abandon your instincts just to avoid her withdrawal. And it feels noble. It feels like love. But it's not. It's servitude dressed up as devotion. You don't escape this pattern by trying to fix her. You escape it by facing yourself, by dismantling the fantasy, by integrating the anima so you no longer need her to complete you. That's where freedom begins. Not in walking away from her, but in walking back to yourself. You can't fight manipulation if you're still addicted to being chosen. That's the deeper truth Jung would force you to face. The anima's power isn't just in fantasy. It's in how easily it hijacks your sense of worth. You don't just want her approval, you need it. And that need becomes the chain. It disguises itself as love, devotion, romantic purpose. But it's just fear in a beautiful mask. The fear of being alone, the fear of being unseen, the fear that without someone's attention, you don't exist. A man who hasn't made peace with his own inner feminine will always chase it externally. He'll call it love, but it's really submission. Submission to validation, to comfort, to the idea that someone else can fix what he refuses to face. Jung didn't see this as romance. He saw it as regression. The man returns to the boy. The anima becomes the mother, and the relationship turns into a silent contract. I'll trade my power if you promise not to leave. It's not spoken, but it's always felt. It's the subtle self-erasure that slowly devours integrity. This is the psychological blueprint behind emotional dependence, behind simping, behind every man who says he's in love, but loses his fire the moment he gets what he thought he wanted. Because what he really wanted wasn't partnership. It was rescue. Rescue from his own emptiness, from the discomfort of self-discovery, from the terrifying task of becoming whole on his own terms. And rescue always comes with a price. Because once you hand over the responsibility for your wholeness, you become a puppet. Your strings are pulled by attention, affection, and the threat of abandonment. You stop acting from truth and start performing for approval. And every performance takes you further from your center. If you don't bring your anima into consciousness, if you don't learn to honor your emotional depth without handing it over, you'll keep looking for wholeness in someone who was never built to carry it. That's not love. That's projection with lipstick. It looks poetic, dramatic, passionate, but it's hollow. And it always ends the same way, in resentment, confusion, and collapse. Because no one can carry the weight of being your answer. That's your work. That's your task. And Jung knew, until a man faces this, he remains ruled not by love, but by fear in disguise. Once you recognize the anima's influence, the real work begins. Not in her, but in you. Because she doesn't disappear. She transforms. The emotional pull you once felt toward fantasy, toward idealization, now becomes a path inward. Jung called this process integration. And integration isn't about killing the anima. It's about taking back the power she's been holding. Here's what that looks like in real life. Instead of chasing women who reflect your unacknowledged needs, you start to own those needs. Instead of needing her to admire you, you confront the part of you that doubts yourself. Instead of expecting her to rescue you emotionally, you become the one who rescues your own neglected self. A man who does this work becomes dangerous. Not in the harmful sense, but in the sovereign sense. He's not manipulated by flattery. He doesn't crumble under rejection. He doesn't confuse emotional chaos with passion. He sees clearly, loves intentionally, and walks away cleanly when respect is lost. And this is where most men hesitate. Because confronting the anima means confronting the boy inside, who still hopes someone else will save him. That boy must grow up, not through shame, but through truth. Through the willingness to stand alone long enough to become whole. The anima isn't here to punish you. She's here to teach you. And if you're willing to stop projecting her onto every woman you meet, you'll finally be able to relate. Not as a beggar, but as a man. Jung warned that if a man does not consciously engage with his inner feminine, his anima, he becomes ruled by her from the shadows. This doesn't just affect how he loves. It affects how he thinks, decides, and navigates reality. He begins to see life not through clarity, but through emotional distortion. He becomes reactive, guilt-ridden, easily manipulated, not by others at first, but by himself. Here's the danger. An unconscious anima doesn't just live in your fantasies. She infiltrates your relationships. Suddenly, you're drawn to women who echo your internal conflict, women who reflect your wounds, your unintegrated emotions, your need to be mothered instead of met as a man. You call it love. You call it fate. But really, it's repetition. You're living a loop. And the loop is always the same. Idealization, infatuation, collapse. You place her on a pedestal, ignoring the red flags. You lose yourself in her attention, her affection, her approval. Then one day she pulls away or shows her humanity, and everything shatters. Not because she failed you, but because you expected her to complete a part of you that you never claimed on your own. This is what Jung meant when he said that every man must make the unconscious conscious. It's not just about shadow work, it's about self-possession, about knowing when your heart is speaking and when it's just your wounds looking for a nurse. A woman is not meant to carry your unlived life. Until you see the anima clearly, she'll keep appearing in your life wearing different faces. And every time, you'll fall harder, lose more, and wonder why it keeps happening. It's not her. It's your pattern. And patterns don't break themselves. You have to break them with clarity, with courage, with ownership. A man who hasn't faced his anima becomes addicted to emotional extremes. He chases high-intensity love, drama, chaos, because deep down, he equates intensity with depth. But this is not maturity. This is confusion. And Carl Jung knew it. He warned that when the anima is unintegrated, she distorts reality. She pulls you into a world where you're either a hero or a failure, worshipped or rejected. There's no center, just swings. This is why some men keep ending up in the same kind of relationship with different faces. The patterns repeat. The emotional highs, the devastating lows, the slow erosion of boundaries. He doesn't realize it's not about the woman. It's about the unresolved psychic material he's projecting onto her. The chaos is coming from inside. When a man doesn't do this work, he becomes a magnet for manipulation. Not because women are villains, but because he's already surrendered to a fantasy. He wants to be needed more than he wants to be respected. He wants to feel chosen more than he wants to be whole. And that desperation is what opens the door to control. To break the cycle, you have to separate emotion from illusion. You have to stop romanticizing your pain and start confronting it. Because the anima isn't here to destroy you. She's here to test you, to see if you will integrate her or let her rule you. Emotional maturity means you can feel without being controlled. You can love without losing yourself. You can face chaos without becoming part of it. That's the mark of a man who's done the inner work, not just the outer performance. There's a quiet kind of manipulation that doesn't look like manipulation at all. It looks like emotional need, like soft vulnerability, like a cry for closeness. But Jung knew the unconscious plays games the conscious mind refuses to see. If you haven't integrated your own need for validation, then you won't notice when someone starts using theirs to control you. Not all control is aggressive. Sometimes it comes wrapped in dependence, in guilt, in unspoken expectations that twist your desire to protect into a script you never agreed to. And if you've been conditioned to seek approval, to feel needed, to rescue, that script feels natural. You'll follow it without question. But here's the problem. When a man becomes emotionally obedient, he stops being grounded. His decisions aren't his anymore. They're filtered through someone else's reactions. And over time, he loses the ability to tell the difference between compassion and manipulation. Jung warned that if you don't bring awareness to these unconscious dynamics, you'll repeat them over and over. You'll call it love. You'll call it sacrifice. But really, it's fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of not being chosen. Fear of facing the part of yourself that still believes worth is something to be earned through emotional servitude. That fear has to be named, because if you don't name it, someone else will use it. And not always with bad intentions, but with real consequences. You can't be clear with others until you're clear with yourself. And clarity only comes when you stop outsourcing your inner stability to someone else's approval. This is where real strength begins. Not in dominance, not in detachment, but in knowing the difference between connection and control. You can't fight manipulation with blame. You fight it with awareness. Jung understood that men who haven't integrated their anima aren't just vulnerable to external manipulation, they attract it. Not because they're weak, but because part of them wants to be manipulated. It wants to surrender responsibility, to be consumed by something greater, to avoid the burden of becoming whole. This unconscious craving shows up in patterns. You feel drawn to intensity. You confuse chaos for passion. You chase women who keep you guessing, not because you enjoy uncertainty, but because deep down, you equate unpredictability with meaning. That's not love. That's addiction to your own psychological projection. When a man doesn't have a strong sense of self, he looks for someone else to give it to him. And often, he finds women who are more than willing to play the role, consciously or not. They test, they withhold, they perform, and he reacts, not with strength, but with desperation. That desperation is the death of masculine clarity. Jung would say, stop blaming the mirror and start studying your reflection. Ask yourself, why do I respond to this? What part of me feels alive in dysfunction? What am I avoiding by surrendering my identity in this relationship? These aren't easy questions, but if you don't ask them, you'll keep repeating the cycle. Woman after woman, high after crash, fantasy after fallout. Until the man becomes solid within, every relationship will be a test he's not ready for. And every manipulative dynamic will be a symptom, not a cause. The real issue isn't her. It's the parts of you you've refused to reclaim. There comes a point where a man must stop asking why she changed and start asking why he ignored the signs, why he gave so much, why he disappeared into someone else's story and called it love. Jung didn't teach blame, he taught ownership. And the final stage of waking up is realizing you were never just hurt by another person. You were hurt by your own blindness. Projection is powerful, but integration is stronger. When you face your anima, not as fantasy, but as a force, you gain back what you lost. Your focus, your boundaries, your sense of self. You stop chasing a woman to complete you and start choosing relationships that reflect your wholeness, not your wounds. This is where most men stay stuck. They cling to the pain, hoping it'll teach them something. But pain without insight is just suffering, and suffering without growth is just repetition. The real lesson comes when you stop performing the nice guy, the rescuer, the selfless lover, and start becoming something more dangerous. A man who sees clearly. That man doesn't hate women. He doesn't fear them. He respects them and himself. He doesn't chase approval. He doesn't project salvation. He stands grounded in who he is, because he knows what he was once willing to sacrifice. And he's never going